Hello and welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thank you for joining me again. Today's guest is Dr. Samantha Worthington. Samantha is a consumer psychology and behavior specialist, peak performance expert, and leadership consultant. She advises business leaders, entrepreneurs, athletes, and performers on the tested and proven methods, concepts, techniques, and winning strategies to achieve higher levels of success, resolve challenges they may face, and propel exponential personal and business growth. Her role is to successfully deliver and build stable and flexible leadership teams capable of driving innovation and therefore growing long-term organizational profitability that is significant, sustainable, and achieved with integrity by truly meeting the needs of all stakeholders. Again, thank you for joining me for the first podcast of 2025. These podcasts will drop through this year on a monthly basis, and I'm very excited to share this conversation with you. But as always, enough from me. I'll hand over to today's guest, Dr. Samantha Worthington. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV video podcast series. Thank you for joining me again. This conversation will be the first of 12 for this year, and I'm delighted and very honored to be joined by Dr. Samantha Worthington. How are you, Samantha?
I'm very well, thanks, Eric. How are you doing?
Not too bad for a Friday. Let's start at the beginning here. And for those watching watching or listening to the conversation, we agreed offline that we're going to be talking about challenges to leadership. And in our conversations, setting this particular podcast discussion up, I was particularly interested in where this might go, given what you do for a living. So before we get into the themes and questions, can I get you to share with with my audience what it is that you do in that leadership type space?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much for having me, Eric. It's an honor to be on your show today. I really appreciate you inviting me. So I look after development at a C-suite and leadership level. I am a consumer psychologist and a peak performance and behavior specialist. So I go into organizations usually when they're not working well. So when I come in, things are about to change. And I have a look at the processes, the leadership styles, everything that's working internally and externally, or that's not working internally and externally for an organization. And I have a look at where the gaps are, look at what opportunities the organization has to either streamline or to grow and develop further, and what's required for that organization as well as its leadership team to make that happen.
That's a good summary of what it is that you're doing. And in fact, I think it's a very difficult space to work in when you're being asked to come in when
Yes.
the proverbial is about to hit the fan, and there's all sorts of rabbit holes we could go down with that. But extending that idea about the complexity of leadership, and for the benefit of this conversation, we're going to be looking at challenges to leadership. So I'll start by asking you, and this is purely from your perspective, what do you believe are the three key leadership challenges that we should be dealing with at the moment?
Yeah, so when I go into organizations, I would say that there's definitely three common themes. There is number one is the business environment. So it's very dynamic and constantly changing. And in terms of organizational readiness as well, I would look at that as a challenge number three. So especially after COVID, when we've had situations with advanced technology, the demise of the hierarchy system as we know it as well. And with that, I would say the third challenge that comes in from a leadership perspective is a lack of cooperation, organizationally wide, as well as within teams, because of that breakdown of that traditional hierarchy level and what leadership was to what it is now. Those are definitely three challenges that I find are present in every single organization. And often our leaders are unaware of the third one most in particular, that lack of cooperation and that sort of relationship that leaders don't have on the ground and with the the employees that are facing their customers and their clients. So there's a massive gap between where the decisions are made and where they're implemented. And the feedback that organizations are getting, they're getting them at the coalface, they're getting them on the ground. And that route or communication channel up to those leaders who are making those decisions, it seems to be broken in a lot of organizations. And often the leaders are unaware of that. So I would say that's a big one as well.
So if you'll indulge me, let's focus if we can on that biggest challenge around communication and what goes wrong in teams and potentially what the impact of culture is, because communication lines often reflect how the whys and whats and hows of how communication is allowed to flow within the organization. So, and I wouldn't ask you to name any names, obviously, in where you've seen this in potential clients or in other organizations, but it seems to me there's a lot of noise before information can get to leaders. But let me throw a hand grenade here into the conversation and see what you think of this. Is as much as sometimes leaders, whether they're your senior leadership team or those in middle management positions that are still in leadership roles,
Mm.
there's a degree of, yeah, they don't know maybe what's going on, but is there some truth to sometimes they don't want to know what's going on, and keeping deaf to that is a strategy to de-stress yourself. Now, I'm not saying all people do this, but I would hazard a guess, people being people, that at times you just don't want to know when little fires are happening, and you're kind of relying on your team, your experts in your team to deal with that, and only escalate it to you when it gets into that sort of catastrophic or, yeah, you need to intervene level. So that's one aspect of what I'm curious about. And the other one is you can't expect someone in fairly large organizations that are in leadership roles to get involved at all levels to understand what's going on. That's why you have a hierarchy of leaders to be able to hopefully deal with that. So how do you deal with the tension there?
That's often when I come in.
Oh, okay, right, right.
um, so there are quite a few things there that we can talk about. One of them is lack of collaboration. And that's a huge one. So we're looking at leaders on all different levels, right? So leaders that are first line managers, leaders that are working up the ranks to junior managers, senior managers, directors, and then you're looking at C-suites and general managers, etc. When there is a lack of collaboration, those small little fires aren't addressed at a level where they're happening due to lack of collaboration. And then further up the line, the same story happens. And there's a couple of really interesting reasons why that happens. And I've found that one of the things that happens is within an organization, when you've got someone that is promoted. So initially they were in a particular team and then they get promoted to manage that team, for example, for whatever reasons that is. And it could obviously be due to, they've got better management or leadership skills. However, they may not be the most experienced person in the team. It's due to their leadership skills that they've been promoted into that role. That's where it often starts to break in organizations, because now they're managing or leading their peers. And it becomes there are a whole lot of emotions that go in with that. And the collaboration is either there on a peer level, or that collaboration is not there because they're seen as part of a different team now. They're part of a leadership team and they're not part of, that group. So it can start right from the bottom. And if it starts there, and, there's that saying, fish will rot from its head down, right? And there's also a very real situation where you have these small fires that are starting at the coalface or in the lower levels of management that are ignored, or they are not collaborate and not, there's no collaboration, or they are not discussed with high levels of leaders, because that particular person is concerned that they may be stuffing up, or they may not be seen in the best light by those by their senior leaders. So they don't have that discussion, and that is 9 out of 10 times, it's a huge issue in terms of the failing of culture. And again, culture is a big one. There's so many areas that we can talk about there in terms of why culture can go wrong. We've got leaders that may not have, and there's been a change, right? There's been a change absolutely in leadership, especially after COVID, in terms of that hierarchy that was originally there to now be more along the lines of relationship or relationship leadership, and that has been quite imperative for culture development. If that relationship is not there within teams, and if that relationship is not there across all those levels of leadership, then there is no collaboration. There's competition. There's things that are being omitted in meetings. There are conversations that are not happening when they absolutely should be. And that affects the culture, because the trust issue is broken down when those conversations are not being had. And when there's no trust, there are things like micromanagement, the belief that people within the organization are not all working towards one vision, one mission, one goal. And that can really damage culture, because everyone that is listening to this and everyone that goes to work every single day is there for their own reasons. And that to be a fulfilled and a happy worker or employee or leader or manager at whatever level you need to be in, you need to feel that you are contributing. You need to feel that you are valued. And the culture issue comes in when there's a lack of collaboration, there's a lack of trust, and then that value is questioned. Or silly things start getting questioned, where it becomes more like a school environment rather than an environment for development of more leaders, development of personal development and professional development and growth. And that's where I think the damage to culture happens.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting response. There's a fair bit we could unpack. What is of interest to me from that leadership perspective, and you've covered a few points there, is I'll break this down into a couple of segments, I think. The first one is there's a certain degree of agency that people bring to roles and people bring to leadership. So you have the capacity to do some things if you want to, in terms of what's happening in the culture. It's whether or not you feel safe enough to do those things. So having that difficult conversation from a subordinate up to someone in a leadership role is a hell of a lot more difficult than the other way around. Not that
Yeah.
I'm saying that difficult conversations um aren't difficult to engage in for leaders also. Then there's the issue that you touched on has the world of work and the structure of organizations really changed that much, or is it that we are now seeing that certain other things in how we relate to each other in the workspace have been highlighted? So as an example, and you mentioned this thing about managing your network of relationships within the business is, I would have thought, something that was assumed to have been important, but didn't
Yeah,
play out so much until COVID happened,
that's
because
right.
my understanding of it, and I haven't worked in an office for about 25 years. I've been working remotely for a very long time. So when COVID hit for people like me, wasn't a big deal because I was working remote
Mhm.
anyway. But if your whole career trajectory has been around working in that office space environment, I think COVID would have thrown up a couple of issues that have not been dealt with before, not just by teams, but I think by those in leadership positions. So I don't know how much, and again, this is I put no research on this. This is just my personal view that I really don't think the cultures of places really changed that much. I think things were highlighted where things were going wrong, but it also highlighted very good practice amongst some teams and very good practice amongst some leaders. So I have no doubt that we'll get a string of new theories around leadership to do with
Yeah.
relationships in the workplace. I think always the variable, the confound that people don't think a lot about is the power dynamic in some organizations. And I think as they get bigger and are more institutional, so I'm thinking very big corporates, very big government agencies, hierarchies tend to form or are needed because you have to manage a whole lot more people than if you're talking about a small business. And so I would assume the culture in organizations, not irrespective of size, will differ in organizations when it's potentially one entrepreneur or a leader in a team of three or four versus someone who's leading a team of 500 or 600 that potentially could be geographically dispersed. You're relying on networks of leaders to achieve the things that you need to achieve. So this conversation gets a lot more nuanced and complicated depending on the type of business you're talking about. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And um, I think what I would like to highlight as well is there's absolutely um, a spotlight, like you said. The issues were always there. The spotlight came on when our working arrangements changed and we were forced to change. And a lot of leadership styles or lack thereof came into the spotlight. And there was a bit of research that was done in terms of what the results of that was. And what they found was originally you had these two different types of leaders. You had these leaders that were able to accept what was happening and move with the changes and get that trust and that relationship going with their teams and with their senior leaders, who they reported to. And then there were leaders who pretended it wasn't happening and continued to lead in a style that wasn't conducive to where it was going. And that was where I think the issues that you're saying that have always been there were really highlighted. And, I'm not sure what the percentages are. However, I'm sure there were a lot of organizations where leadership styles were different to what they are now and questioned at that time in terms of what is the trust factor between yourself and your teams. If you're talking about a CEO who has their team of 7, 12, etc., direct reports that are running businesses and massive departments under them, that would have come into consideration or put under the spotlight as well. So I think that you're absolutely right in terms of it was always there. I think the way that the world and that business environment became so dynamic and changed so quickly, it highlighted where leaders were more designed to handle change in a positive way with their teams, and those that were a lot more static and struggled with that.
Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for those that struggle because I think those that might get what's the word? Pigeonholed into, oh, you're just a static leader, you didn't
Yeah,
want to change. Maybe they didn't know how or had the toolkit
absolutely.
to do
Yeah.
it. I think there'll be a percentage in that grouping have a nuance that looks that really didn't know, and there are some that were so headstrong and the sociopathic narcissist leaders that are out there, they wouldn't have given a staff, they just want to get things done. So COVID was a
They want
blip.
results. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was a blip in that sense, and not in a good way. My experience of it was through my network, for what this is worth, that there were varying degrees of dealing with the impacts on businesses and on leadership styles post COVID. And I'm not aware of any studies yet, but someone will get the funding to do, some kind of massive international meta-analysis of what has gone on to try and get some learning out there, because I think there's a wealth of training and or professional development for leaders to learn from what happened, not because of COVID itself, so it being a um, global health concern. If you take that element out of it, and I'm not for a second downplaying the impacts on people around the world on their health and those that succumbed to the illness, but I'm talking about if you looked at COVID as a disrupting
Mm.
force for the world of work, then what can you learn about how you deal with disruptions as they hit your
And
industry,
quickly.
your business, and
Mm.
how are you designed in the organization to be able to strategically deal with that stuff? So I'm trying to take it away from people just for a
Mm.
second
Mm.
here, that um, to what degree were our businesses designed across industry sectors to deal with a shock like this? And for those that did it very well, it'd be interesting to find out what were the dynamics of that business, and in which industries did they cope
Mm.
with the pandemic better than others. And there's going to be some factors that are pretty understandable, and there's going to be those other unknown factors that leaders and even your teams will step up to the plate and go the extra mile when there's uh, a catastrophic event happening. COVID being one of those things. I heard a lot of really good stories about team members checking in on each other,
Mm.
leaders having time through the day to check on their teams to make sure that their headspace
Yeah.
was right and had nothing to do with work.
Mm.
That to me is not necessarily a leadership learning. It's just being a good human being, that
Yeah.
put
Absolutely.
aside put aside the shit of work,
Yeah.
deal with the person in front of you. And
Agreed. Yeah.
I think that brought out the best in some people. And for those that were hit and just dumbfounded by what was going on, I'm not surprised that the reaction might have been keep things as normal and put your head in the sand, or
Yeah.
I really don't know what to do, but I'm not going to tell anyone.
Yeah.
Don't know what to do, and I'll sort of wing it.
Yeah.
I would ask you this then, leaving COVID behind,
Mm.
and now that we are in the world of work that we have,
Mm.
what would you recommend, given your experience with leaders, is something that they could put in their toolkit that would help them to deal with the communication issue that we were talking about? What would you recommend somebody do?
Mm. Um, I'm going to go with two tools that I think are really important. One would be a human subjective one, and the other is quite operational. So if I start with the operational side, I would say really strong processes. Sorry, really strong processes. And I found that when I work with organizations now, the ones that survived COVID well, they had really good processes and procedures in place from an operational level. So things were able to adjust where they needed to. However, the groundwork was there. And what I also, and again, we assume, right? We assume from the outside that organizations have all their processes in place, all the backups in place, and everyone knows what they meant to do, and that's all documented. I can't tell you how many organizations I have gone into, really big ones, really well-known ones, that don't have all of their processes in check and they don't have it documented. And the ones that survive transformation and change and crisis, such as COVID or anything else, are the ones that have that down pat and really well organized, orchestrated, and they have a backup plan as well. So that would definitely be something I would suggest. Have those processes in place. Don't make them hard in the terms of if they need to change towards that dynamic business environment, they need to change and be open to that and change as trends come and go. However, have those operational processes in place, because it's something that your team can fall back on and your leaders can fall back on, or have and know where they need to go, why and how, and what that mission is. So that's one thing I would suggest. The other, from a leadership, from a soft skill, and by no means less important, is the development of trust within teams from the top all the way down. So that understanding that each person that is in your team as a leader, knowing that they're there for a reason, they're there with a purpose, and they're there with a skill. And your job as a leader is to be able to bring that out and to ensure that they know what that is, what their hidden genius is, so that they can contribute to the best of their ability in any transformation or change situation, or just general day-to-day business as usual. So being able to, as a leader on your own, know what your personal value is, what your significance is to your organization, and keep developing that and growing that and being aware of that. And then making sure that your team, whoever that is, so if you're the CEO, whatever your leadership team looks like, whoever is in there, going all the way down to the ground floor, making sure that every person that's in that team knows what they're contributing. You trust them to contribute that. You're there to help them develop. You're there to help them grow as an individual and to give their best and provide their best. Leadership and leaders are one of the number one contributors to how fulfilled a person is in their job. And if they are not fulfilled, they do not deliver to the best of their ability. It's just human nature. It's the way we designed. As humans, we need to be valued. We need to see opportunities for growth. We need to be connected. And a leader, and I think you and I have spoken about this before, they can't have everything, right? They can't have every single skill that's a top leadership skill. I do believe that that is a necessary one in terms of having a team and knowing as a leader what your significance is and what you bring to the organization, and then knowing what your team brings. And often a great leader will build a team where they, as the leader, where their weaknesses are, or where they don't, not fail, but they're not the best at, or whatever that situation is, they will surround themselves with a team or with other leaders that can complement them, and then they need to collaborate.
That's brilliant. Just on that last point, I've spoken to some guests before that have been in leadership roles, and the conversations that still sort of resonate with me, and you've brought this up, so I'd like to share it again because I think it's worth repeating that the really great leaders are the ones that are tell you up front, I suck at this, and this, but that's why I've got the
Yeah.
team that I've got, because they build on the deficits that I bring and enhance the skills that I've already got. But I think those leaders, or at least the ones I've met that are prepared to say that out loud,
Mm.
don't have an ego getting in the way. And
Yeah. You're
it was
self-aware.
it was funny. I wasn't going to interrupt you before when you did say no one person has all those leadership skills. We could probably think of some people that think they do have all those leadership skills.
I can think of a few.
Yeah, same. And yeah, you just have to deal with that as we go. Another thing that was a very interesting point, I hadn't thought about this for a long time, and I think it's just in the lexicon, how we speak around leadership. The
Mm.
people stuff are not soft skills.
Yeah.
I would love
Yeah.
for to read a paper or have somebody start
Yeah.
advocating that when you talk about skills that managers who are leaders in their own right,
Mm.
leaders within the organization at senior levels, look at what you need to succeed as operational technical skills,
Mm.
leadership skills, and the people
The
element.
EQ.
That yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that I personally wouldn't go with EQ, but I understand what you mean. I think whatever the overarching term is, and I don't know what it is, but I get really quite annoyed when in the literature or when you speak to
Yeah.
others, I'm not talking about you here, when they use the soft skills as a crutch to say what's more important is making the money and doing
Mm.
other things, and the people bit, that's just stuff you got to think about in the periphery. And
Yeah.
I can remember on the come up, me trying to learn what leadership was, some of the models I used to see had the people skills sort of on the outer, not towards the
Yes.
center of the critical mass.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you wake up and you go to jobs, you're around other human beings, you need them to succeed, and you need to create relationships with the people outside of your business, where does the people bit not become central there? And I think the greatest salespeople, the greatest leaders I've ever seen pick up on the people bit so early and master that so well that it's not something that's they have to push up front because they have the language and they have that way of including people that you're not thinking about that. So it's often I've often wondered why we still want to categorize the people element of the leadership discussion as a soft skill. It's the hardest
It's
thing to
important.
master
Yeah.
that's out there. And
Yeah.
I've met senior leaders that are semi-retired or retiring that will admit that at the end of a career that the hardest bit was dealing with the people and the emotions and the that interconnection of bringing yourself to the job. Because you said before, and I found this very interesting, Samantha, that people go to work for different reasons. Yeah, 100%. To suggest that when they get in, suddenly they click the vision and mission button in their head, and
Yeah.
suddenly it's completely aligned is not
No,
normal or true.
no.
And look, I would hazard a guess if you've had some kind of loss or some kind of issue at home and you go to work the next day, that's not out of the back of your head, so it's going to impact what you do. And yeah, look, the I can think of a few examples here where people that I've known in my junior career have come to work and you know something is not quite right,
Mm.
and you see the senior manager or leader come in and go, take the person away, have a conversation. That
Yeah.
person is asked to go home or
Yeah.
to have some alone time or some detox time, not at work, not because they're going to ruin the workflow. It's that they're not in the right headspace
Yeah.
to be their best self and not just for the work but for themselves. And so I always keep that in the back of my mind that a job is a job and you need to make money and profit if you're in that world. Not for profit, slightly different, but if the people around you are not in the right headspace, give them time to get there and
Mm.
then get them back when they've resolved some things. And if you can help, great. But yeah, I've never seen it as a soft skill, but I'd love to see a debate around somebody bringing up the idea that, yeah, the people skills are not critical. Everything we've talked about and everything you read, if you read between the lines, if the people element wasn't there, who's going to get the job done?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can be a CEO on your own.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then what are you leading? Are you
What
just
are you leading? Absolutely.
you're just on your own. Look, really, I've really liked this conversation, and I do want to ask you one last thing before we wrap things up, is around what are you seeing for 2025 as a key leadership issue that maybe isn't being talked about and should be?
Hmm. I'm going to extend what we've been talking about, um, and and really go back to culture. I think that there have been immense changes. There has been a lot of positive changes and fast changes. There's been a lot of transformation in that business environment, in the wider business world. It's been very dynamic, and I found if I had to pick out one thing in terms of organizations that I go into, um, I was chatting to someone the other day, and they were I had done work with their organization previously, and at a different organization I was representing, we had had a meeting to collaborate on a project, and one of the things that I said to him was, if I'm here, it's there's a problem. If I'm sitting having a conversation with you, whatever client I'm sitting with, there's something that needs to change, right? And often when I go into an organization, if not always, if the culture is, I wouldn't say fixed, it's not broken, it's just not suitable. If the culture is addressed, the organization will move forward in a much quicker, more cohesive, collaborative way. And in terms of issues that organizations are experiencing now and they're going to in the future, we have got generations that are coming in. We've got technology that is changing at a rate that we cannot keep up with. We've got AR that's coming in. We've got that's already here, right? We've got so many things that are changing from one day to the next, hours to hours in certain industries. And if your culture is not right, you're not gonna be competitive. And I think that one of the tools that I often like to bring in is focusing on culture and actually having teams that are committed to culture on its own. A lot of organizations don't see that as important until it's failing, and until they have people that are not they're committed, or they're loyal, they've been there for a long time, and they have the skills and they have the expertise and they've got the personalities and they have everything that's suitable. However, they're disconnected from the organization, so they're not bringing that to the front, and that's what we need in a dynamic business environment. We need the culture to be aligned so that the people that are joining the organization, or the people that are there, are putting their best foot forward, and then holding on to them. You could hire an absolute hotshot in terms of skills and expertise, and if your culture is not great in an organization, they'll leave. They'll leave to find an organization that gives them that part of what they're looking for. You're going to lose top talent. And if you're losing top talent, again, you're not competitive. So that's definitely something I would focus on going forward. Change is inevitable. Transformation is inevitable. We will have technology that often organizations can't keep up with. However, from a people perspective, if the culture is right and you're attracting the top talent, if you're attracting those minds, those great minds, because you're a great place to work, then you're going to remain competitive regardless.
Words of wisdom, Samantha. Thank you very much. Before we go, how can people reach out to you if they want to have a chat or want to understand more about what you do?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Eric. So they can reach me via my website. It's www.drsamanthaworthington.com. And all my details are on their email. They can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, reach out to me via the website.
No worries. Thank you very much. And for those listening, this has been the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Thank you for joining us again. And thank you again, Samantha.
Thanks, Eric.
That concludes the podcast for today. Thanks, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.